here's a quote followed by a question. Archimandrite Ambrose stated that the height or decline of the spiritual life of the church in each epoch is defined by the condition of monasticism in that period. So, can this problem the church is facing of cacodoxy within be due to the spiritual assaults weakening our monastics? St. Ignatius Branchini have taught that even faith itself would disappear without the presence of monasteries. So that's an interesting question. Certainly, the lack of monastic witness in North America, for instance, and generally the lack of taking our bishops from the monastic life in the monasteries is perhaps the number one problem in the church in the last 200 years. I think I've said this before, but it's worth repeating. There was a concerted effort in Greece in the 19th century on the part of the leadership, both of the state and the church, to create a class of monastics outside of monasteries, baptized as the Archimandrites of Theology, right? Basically, non-monastics, monastics, right? People who had never been in a monastery. They were celibate priests for all intents and purposes, just like the West. They looked to the West as a model. They introduced that, they promoted it, they put them in positions of authority, and over time, now 200 years, that has been a tremendous source of dissolution and erosion of the ascetic monastic ethos among the hierarchy of the Church of Greece. That's why Father John Romanides can say the problem going forward is the bishops, because he saw that systematically over hundreds of years, the monastics no longer were chosen as bishops, whereas they weren't taking bishops from the monasteries, but they had a whole class of monastics, quote unquote monastics, in other words, celibate priests who lived their whole life in an apartment on their own or in a bishopric somewhere with the bishop, but essentially they lived without the kind of monastic regimen and obedience and initiation and purification that would be extremely profitable for them to be proper and good bishops, especially in terms of dogmatic consciousness. One of the big things that happened in the 20th century was the rise of the so-called brotherhoods, Sotir, Zoe, and all the rest. Although they did a lot of work on a basic catechetical level and moral teaching level, and to this day still operate much less than they did in the 50s and 60s. Many of the bishops that came to be in the 70s and 80s and 90s in the Greek Church of Greece were taken from these brotherhoods, especially Zoe, which has pretty much fallen apart in our day. And now these brotherhoods were in ethos heavily influenced by pietism. And so you had a spirit and a mentality which was not super far from 19th century pietism, which did not stress dogmatic consciousness. In other words, they didn't always connect the dogma and the ethos. The teaching of the church in terms of dogma and like ecclesiology, anthropology, cosmology, everything that we know that the patristic witness to as being something that informs and forms our moral and ethical way, right? Those things were not always focused on and suffered. So you had bishops who were focused on moral life, teaching, etc., pietistic approach to things, organizational things. They didn't understand, they didn't teach, they didn't live the dogmatic core, which happens when you're in the proper monastic setting. You're getting that daily in the services, in the readings, in the trapaza, in the readings during the vigil. You're getting dogmatically, you're getting informed by the dogmatic consciousness of the church. That has been severely lacking among those monastics in the world, those archimandrites of theology, those celibate priests, essentially, right? There was a big loss. I mean, a secularization of the clergy, to say it, just generally. So that is definitely at the heart and the problem of the church today. I would say it's the number one problem, actually. So yes, you hit it on the nail in many ways with your question.